stopped us here because I noticed there's a variety of plants, and that's one of our goals today, is take a look at general plant form and function, some of their names, how they got them, and then we're going to look at some of the specific pieces of flowers later on. But right here I wanted us to take a look at how plants grow, because they grow in all sorts of different ways, and looking at those different ways can help us to identify who they are and what other plants they're related to. So there's a few here I want to take a look at specifically. This one's probably pretty familiar to you guys. It's got a shape that's pretty distinctive. It's got needles, which are just modified leaves. And if you remember right, leaves are basically solar panels. They're green, and that's the color of growth, if you remember. That shows the plant is taking in energy from the sun. So they have modified leaves that they're needles. This is a fir tree. This is a Douglas fir. But other plants have needles too, like pines and other species of firs, and our spruces that grow higher up. So this one's pretty easy to identify, at least generally. It's family Pinaceae because it's got needles just like pine trees. There's another interesting one up here I want to show you. This is a plant called chiming bells. And if you had me before, you know that plants don't get their names by accident. They get their name because it has something to do with how they grow or how they look, or even who named them. In this case, the flowers on this plant hang down how bells would. And they're kind of pretty, so they give them a pretty name, chiming bells. This one also has leaves that grow in a pattern on the stem that can help us identify. We'll talk more about this later. But the leaves alternate off the stem. So 1, 1, 1, 1. They don't match up side to side like some other plants. There's another type of plant here. This one's a shrub, and it's a little different. Again, its growth habit is going to tell us some things about who it is, what family it's in, and what plant it is specifically. So this one has kind of a green, soft stem. I can even bend it. I don't know if you can see that. It's not very hard. This plant's only designed to live 1 year before the stem dies and it'll grow back from the roots. This plant has a woody stem. You can see it, it's brown, it kind of looks like wood, and it's hard. If I bent it too much, it would snap. I'm not going to do that because I want to be gentle with it. This plant is designed to live multiple years. It's a shrub instead of a flower. So this is a shrub, and this one has leaves that are very different. It's got leaves that have little ins and outs. And those are called lobes. There's lots of plants that have lobed leaves like that, which are different from how this leaf has sort of smooth, long, lance-shaped leaves. Have little chunky lobes. So this one is a species of currant. I'm not sure which one, but it'll put on berries that you can eat later on. Never eat any berries unless you're with someone who can identify them for sure. Next plant I want to take a look at, let's move down on here. Here's one that everybody knows, I hope. I know what this is by looking at it, even though it doesn't have a flower. This has really distinctive leaves, and again, plant names are not accidental. This is a dandelion. It'll put on a big yellow flower and then a puffy seed head, just like the ones in Pueblo around town in the parks. And it's called a dandelion because in French that means teeth of the lion, because this one has leaves that are lobed also with sharp points that look like a lion's teeth. So dandelions, common, grow all over. This one's growing here, and it's probably not getting enough sun to flower. But there's another interesting plant next to it. These are very different. But this one also has toothed leaves. As you can see, they're kind of pokey. In fact, if you were able to touch this, it might even hurt your hand a little bit. This plant, it's kind of low growing and sort of creeps around, is called creeping grape, if you can believe it. Again, plants aren't getting their name on accident. But this one has alternate leaves, or opposite leaves rather. So you can see how there's one, and then right on the other side of the stem, there's another one. Same thing here, there's one, and then right on the other side of the stem, there's its partner, it matches. So these are opposite, like those were alternate. They can kind of tell us about who the plant is.
Awesome.
boys and girls, I stopped us here because I want to take a look at a few of these flowers that are growing here. And I want to take a look at just kind of general, flowers in general, the parts and pieces and how you can kind of tell them apart. So I've got a fake flower here. This is like a magnolia flower. This is a tree that wouldn't grow here in Colorado, but it's a nice example of the pieces and parts that every flower is going to have. So flowers are actually the reproductive part of a plant. It's how the plant is able to produce new seeds that are going to eventually fall off the adult plant and find some soil and some water and some sun and hopefully grow into a new plant. So flowers are designed to create new flowers, new plants. And they do that in a variety of ways, but they use specialized parts to do it. You've probably heard about flower pollen, or pollen coming from trees, maybe grass pollen, maybe you have pollen allergies, especially at this time of year. Pollen is the male part of the plant, and that happens to come from these little parts. And this is kind of cool. These little parts, these little black ones, they release grains of pollen into the air, or to a bug that might come visit this flower and then go visit another flower. And the part of the plant that releases the pollen is called a stamen. It's easy to remember because the male part of the plant, the stamen, well, these guys have to stay men. Ha! Oh, all right. The female part of the plant, the part where the pollen lands, so it can go down into the ovary and turn into a fertilized seed, that part is this red part or pinkish part here in the middle. And this is usually how flowers are set up. The stamens are outside and the pistil is in the middle. The pistil is the female part of the plant. And I remember that because little girls have a lot of energy and they're like pew, 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 little pistils full of energy. So those are the reproductive parts of the flower. The stamen, which release pollen, and the pistil, which receives the pollen. Around the outside, we have a part of the plant that you're probably pretty familiar with. We have what are called petals. That's these white flowery pieces. This is kind of what makes up most of what we think of as a flower. Petals have a variety of functions. On some plants, they're designed with a certain shape to attract certain animals. On other plants, they're designed with certain colors or patterns to attract other animals. Now, why would a flower want to attract certain animals? Well, it wants those animals to visit to help bring the pollen from the stamens on one flower to the pistil on another flower. And that helps the plants to have genetic diversity. So instead of getting inbred, they can spread their genes around and be healthy and adapt to a variety of environments. So petals are designed to attract certain animals: hummingbirds, bees, wasps, moths, bats. All kinds of animals participate in pollination by visiting the plant. Flowers also have smells, or sometimes even specialized things like nectar, like Ranger Pine talked earlier about hummingbirds eating nectar. They produce that to feed those animals as like an invitation to invite that animal to come in, have a little snack, and then as a byproduct, they take the grains of pollen to another flower. That's really important for the flower, but it's also really important for the animal who's visiting to pollinate. So petals have that purpose in mind. How do we get the right animal to come visit to help us pollinate the other flower? Because remember, plants can't get up and move. They don't have legs. So they have to have animals do it for them. Another part of a flower I want to show you, it's less obvious, but equally important. So we have pistil in the middle, stamens around the outside, petals that surround it all. And then on the bottom, we have these little green guys. And a lot of times they're shaped sort of like petals are. Oh, we have a little syrphid fly that's in front of the camera. That is an excellent example of a pollinator. There's a reason that guy's flying around where we are. He's visiting these plants. But on the bottom of a flower, we have what are called sepals, S-E-P-A-L-S. So sepals sometimes look like petals, but they're basically just kind of the little green, usually they're green, little cup that sort of supports the flower. It's what the flower's kind of built on. It's like the foundation for the flower. Knowing some stuff about flowers, if we count the sepals and we count the petals and we count the stamens and the pistils, usually we can figure out pretty exactly what species that flower is, what type of flower that is. Sometimes we can just tell by looking at them, but other times we have to go counting parts because different species have different numbers. So that's a way we can identify, is by looking at flower parts. Another way to identify, I talked about earlier, we look at the growth habit of the plant. How do the leaves come off of the stem? How big is the plant? Is it a shrub? Is it a flower? Is it a tree? Is it a bush? What's it look like? If we add all that up, and we look at the flower, we can be pretty sure we've identified our plant. So let's take a look at some of these flowers that are right here. I have one I picked earlier. This one, we can take a look at some real life petals and sepals and stamens and pistils. So this is a serviceberry. It's a shrub, and it's in the rose and apple family. And it's got the same number of petals as all those plants do. It's got 5. So it's got 5 white petals on each of these flowers. As you can see, this one grows multiple flowers, kind of all on one cluster. And on the bottom, we've got that little green cup. So it's got 5 sepals, 5 petals. And this one's really small. It's kind of hard for me to see. I'd have to look with a magnifying glass. But we've got 1 pistil and should be 5 stamens. But those are the reproductive parts right in the middle. So that's a real world example of what those parts that we identified look like on a plant. Here we have... These are very common wildflowers up in the mountain park, especially at this time of year. Again, plants aren't named by accident. This one's called Spring Beauty because, wouldn't you know it, it blooms in the spring. And I think it's pretty beautiful. It's got nice little pink stamens in there. And then we've got another interesting one over here. I want to take a look at this one. This flower is really interesting. Remember how I said certain plants have petals that are designed to invite certain animals? This is called a larkspur. And larkspur have kind of these little shelf-like ones. And they're designed to invite a flying insect to come right on in and hover right there while they're feeding on the nectar. Or maybe even a smaller insect could come and perch on this little bottom petal while they're feeding. But while they're feeding, they're also taking pollen grains attached to their body. So when they visit the next larkspur or the next larkspur, they leave behind some of that pollen to help the plant reproduce. Also larkspur, not accidental. See that little long part in the back? A lark is a type of bird, and a spur is like a sharp thing on the back of their leg. Looks just like that. So larkspur got its name because of an adaptation that a bird has. You find that a lot. Nature's pretty connected. Okay, I think that's it for now. Here's a wild onion we stopped to take a look at, and this one's kind of nice. It's one of the first ones that's bloomed this year. So all the rest of them are going to start opening up pretty soon, but this has lots of tiny little flowers. And so every plant has a different flower design, again, to attract certain insects or animals to help them pollinate. This one's got lots of little flowers, and each one is going to get pollinated individually and form its own set of seeds. So this plant will produce a lot of seeds, and as it gets older, they're going to drop down out into the soil and hopefully find the right conditions to grow up and become a new onion plant next year. But this onion is just like chives, or looks just like a garlic plant or an onion plant, like the onions you would have at home that you might eat. The part we usually eat is the part that's underground, the bulb, and there's a little bulb down here in the ground. But actually, the whole plant is edible. Again, never eat something you're not sure what it is. Only ever eat something if you're with somebody who can positively identify it for you. But one of the ways you can tell it's an onion is if you break one of the leaves and you smell it. It smells just like garlic or onions or chives. It's got a really strong oniony smell. So this is pretty common here in the park, and one of the reasons they're common is because they have all these flowers. They're adapted to disperse a lot of seeds. So just kind of something neat to see.
So we finally made it up to the top, to the fire tower, which was built in 1937. It was never actually used by the Forest Service as a fire lookout tower, but it's an excellent destination and one of the most popular destinations in the park for people and families that are out here hiking. From the top of that tower, you can see a lot of landmarks from the area. Pikes Peak, you can even see the reservoir, a little bit of Pueblo, some various mountain peaks from around the area. It's seen better days, and we do have some plans and materials to do a little bit of reconstruction on it. But if you come up here, just it's pretty safe. You just have to be careful climbing the stairs, this ladder. From up at the top, you should be able to see some really cool scenery.
Everybody, hopefully you can hear me. It's a little windy up here because we're nice and exposed. We got great views. Out over this way, you can see the nice big flat kind of bluish area. And then out over this way, that's the Great Plains. That's where we live. Pueblo's down there. I don't know if you can kind of tell, it's sort of a dark spot. That's all the trees that grow around our houses and apartment buildings and schools and everything. We water them so they grow. But otherwise, the plains is kind of like the prairie that we looked at by the river campus. And we call them the Great Plains, not because they're all that great, but because they're really big. They go that way for hundreds and hundreds of miles. You may also be able to see just a tiny little blue strip. That's the reservoir. That's Lake Pueblo at the state park there. And that's a dam that we put on the Arkansas River, so the water collects behind it. And then we can use that water to water our crops and shower, clean our dishes, cook our food, all that kind of stuff we need water for. Also run boats on if you want to get out there and enjoy it. We keep coming around, we come back to some of the mountains that we're up in. We're in the wet mountains. Those are the mountains that you see when you look straight west from Pueblo, closest ones. But way over there, you can see some kind of white patches. That's Pikes Peak poking up over there, and some darker blue ones down lower. That's the Rampart Range. Those are up to our north, bigger mountains, up by like Colorado Springs. So up here on the tower, we got a pretty good view. Why don't we turn and take a look up at our wet mountains? Beautiful forests and hills.
How's it going, guys? This is Ranger Paul, and I just want to take a minute to talk to you guys about energy and where exactly we get energy from. Now, for us as humans, we usually get energy from the things we eat, like our breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But for the appliances in our household, as well as our automobiles, and other things like that, they get their energy from two different places, either non-renewable resources or renewable resources. The first one I want to talk to you guys about is non-renewable resources. Now, these resources make up the majority of our energy consumption. Now, let's talk about non-renewable resources. These are resources that we cannot reuse, hence the word non-renewable. These include things like oil, coal, and natural gas. Now, the reason we can't reuse these energy sources is because it takes millions of years to actually create them. So there's not a replenishing supply of them. Actually, the way that they're made is from decomposing plant matter. And in a similar fashion of making fossils, this plant matter is met with a lot of pressure and heat and actually compresses it. Just kind of like how our fossils are pressed down and with a lot of pressure and heat, they're made into fossils. That's actually where we get the word fossil fuels from, because of they follow similar processes in order to make them. Now, on the opposite spectrum of non-renewable resources, we have things we call renewable resources. And quite opposite of the non-renewable resources, these are resources that are replenishable. When I talk about replenishable, I'm talking about things that we can use over and over again. For example, wind is a renewable resource. No matter how many times wind blows a turbine, there'll always be more coming after it. Another example of renewable resources is solar power. The sun will always shine no matter how much solar panels we have. We will never use up the solar energy. These resources make up for about 20% of all our energy consumption, a very small amount when compared to non-renewable resources. Try to say that 3 times fast. Now, as we continue to use non-renewable resources to power our homes and automobiles, we are releasing a ton of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This is causing an increase in greenhouse gases, increasing the temperatures on the Earth's surface. One way that we can help reduce this impact is by reducing, reusing, and recycling. By implementing these three concepts, we can dramatically reduce our carbon footprint and begin to alter the Earth's climate change. This can take forms in many different ways, from turning off your light when you leave the house to turning off the water when you're brushing your teeth. The little things are things that make the difference.
So thanks for joining us today on our hike to the fire lookout tower. Hope you learned some interesting things about birds and wildflowers. And I really hope to see you out here in the park. If you get a chance to get out, get a little recreation, get some fresh air, enjoy nature, take a look at some of these birds we have that have migrated up here this spring, and wildflowers. Just stay safe. I hope you guys are well, hope your families are healthy, and looking forward to seeing you out here. Have a good summer.
Take care, everybody.